Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. There we go. Getting people in. Hi. Long time no see for some of you. If this is your first panel, welcome. We're going to just jump right ahead because I know we're a teeny tiny bit over time. Please welcome Dr. Janina Scarlet and Dr. Kaela Joseph. I'm very excited to have them here. They've both done events with us in the past, but this is obviously something new and exciting for all of us. And I'm so grateful that they are taking the time to join us here. Dr. Janina pioneered superhero therapy to help individuals with anxiety, depression, and PTSD, which earned her the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award. And her work has been featured in major media outlets, and she consults on projects with HBO and more. And Dr. Kaela Joseph is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in LGBTQ plus psychology, healthcare equity, and fan activism. They are the co-author of Fandom Acts of Kindness, a heroic guide to activism, advocacy, and doing chaotic good. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being here. We'll just jump in. Do you guys want to say a little bit about what kindness means to you? I'm going to toss it to Janina first.
Oh gosh, what a great question. First of all, thank you so much for having me and organizing this event. To me, kindness is doing something to support somebody else, to give to somebody else, and I think it has no agenda to it. It's just doing something from the heart, uh, just to support somebody, whether it's to put a smile on their face or to support them through a difficult time.
Love that answer. Kaela.
And second, thank you for having me. Um, I think about kindness as community and coalition building. It's something that I think really ties people together and really holds the bonds of community together, especially in tough times.
Love that. Awesome. All right, so the way that this panel is going to work, we're just going to go through some group questions together. I'm going to ask you guys, and then we're going to have a little bit of a practical Q&A at the end where we'll take some questions from people. And I know that for those of you who were there for the last panel, we weren't able to have people come on screen just because there were so many of you and there were so many questions, and I just didn't want to miss. I wanted to get to as many questions as possible. For this one, we will have people come on screen if you would like. We'll get to that a little bit more towards the end. All right, so I'm going to toss this to Janina first. What are some early signs that someone might need kindness and support, and how can we approach them gently? This is obviously a question for someone in your circle. We want to tailor it that way. There are different ways to approach strangers, but at the end of the day, if you're not someone who's trained in that, might not be the best to jump in. But yeah, if you have a loved one that you think like, what are some ways that you've noticed that people start to show those signs?
Great question. I love that question. I think some early signs are probably maybe seeing that the person is not quite themselves. Maybe they're appearing more irritable, more withdrawn, sometimes snappy. And unfortunately, sometimes when we observe that, we might think, oh, maybe I should stay away. Maybe they're having a bad day. But I think sometimes it's worth a check-in in terms of, hey, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. I'm just noticing that maybe you don't seem quite yourself. I just want to let you know I'm here. Or is there anything you need? So to me, those are some of the first kind of telltale signs that maybe somebody could use some support, whether they're aware of it or not, so that's kind of what I look for.
Yeah. Kayla, any thoughts?
I think one of the things that I look for in my inner circle is when folks are getting a little quiet. So sometimes it's not so outwardly shown that someone is struggling. And so when I don't hear from folks, I'll every now and then kind of check in. Hey, are you doing okay? I haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, awesome. Love that. Next question. What role does self-compassion play in supporting mental well-being, and how can individuals kind of cultivate that within themselves? Toss it back to you, Janina.
I love that. Self-compassion is one of my favorite topics. And I think so many of us, unfortunately, were raised to put everyone else's needs before our own, thinking that it is selfish to care for ourselves. But I really resonate with the airplane metaphor, right? When we're flying on the plane, we're told to put on our own oxygen mask before supporting others. where self-compassion is not selfish. It's a recharge that we need to have the spoons, right? The charge that we need to support other people. And so self-compassion can include taking a rest break, checking in with ourselves, maybe practicing an act of kindness toward ourselves, whether again it's rest or having a meal or maybe having some nonverbal quiet time when we're overstimulated, right? And so it could look like anything, but I think one way we can practice it is by asking ourselves, what do I need right now? And if my loved one was going through this, how would I speak to them, or what would I encourage them to do for themselves?
I love that answer. Kaela.
Yeah, I like that we in our field kind of hijack that tendency to help others, to say how can you actually help yourself by thinking about how you would help others? Because that's a much easier go-to for a lot of people is, if you can't think of how you would help yourself, how would you help a friend? How would you help a loved one? Sometimes we'll also say things like, how would you talk to a younger version of yourself? It's harder to be mad at a young version of yourself or be, critical of a younger version of yourself. I think it's also important sometimes when we can't get to compassion to also strive for neutrality. So if compassion is not in the cards that day, can we look at, I work with a lot of folks who experience chronic illness and chronic pain, for example. If we can't get to compassion, can we just treat our bodies like a meat suit? It's there, it has needs. What are the needs today? We don't have to have a thought one way about it or another. It's just there and we're doing something for it. So when we can't get to compassion, neutrality can be the alternative.
Love that. And the chat seems to have resonated with some people in there as well. What are practical ways that people can offer kindness to someone experiencing a mental health crisis without overstepping their boundaries? I'm going to toss that to Janina first.
I'm a big fan of consent in terms of asking questions, such as, would it be okay if I ask you a question? Would it be okay if I ask you how you're doing or check in with you? Would it be okay if I sit next to you? And so I think for many folks who might be feeling overwhelmed, overstimulated, maybe highly triggered or going through a really hard time, a lot of times they receive unwanted advice about how they should feel. And so I think somebody asking for consent to check in or asking if it's okay to learn about what's going on, I think can be such a validating step. And then when somebody's sharing, to really just listen again without offering advice. And a lot of times when we don't know what to say, I think the most compassionate thing we can do is probably to say something along the lines of, thank you for telling me that, I really appreciate it. And is there any way I can support you? Or would it be okay if I check in with you again next week? I think those are probably some of the most helpful things that we can do. And we don't have to solve anything. We don't have to rescue the person. I think it's about just creating a safe space for that individual.
Love that. I agree. I like that someone in the chat said, don't take it personal if that person says no, thank you. It's a good addition. Kaela.
Yeah, I think even better if we can have those conversations before a mental health crisis so that we're not trying to figure that out as somebody's in a heightened state. If you can have that calm conversation of, what do you want me to do? It's a lot easier to think about things when we're calm. And so if you are talking to somebody who's in the middle of a crisis, they also might not know what they need. And so both asking for permission and asking for specifics in the help. So, can I help you with this? And pick a task as opposed to just what do you need help with? Because that person may not be able to articulate that in the moment.
Yeah, I love that. Let's see. We're gonna go ahead and there's someone that has dropped a Q&A question here. So, and actually I really enjoy that question. So we're gonna go ahead and answer it. How do you help others struggling with mental illness without coming off as too much? Because as someone who experiences both, it can definitely sometimes hurt more when people are trying too hard to help. Janina.
Again, I really think that this is where asking for consent is going to be huge. like asking somebody, would it be okay if I check in with you maybe once a week? And maybe it's not okay. Maybe that person doesn't want that. I love the suggestion that Kaela provided in terms of uh, during maybe a calm or neutral time, asking what that person might need in the future, and if possible, writing that down so that when your loved one is going through a hard time, maybe referring to the notes on your phone, for example, saying, "Hey, I remember a month ago when we had this conversation, you mentioned that you would need this. Would it be okay if we try it, or would you rather, me step back or try something else?" So I think the most supportive thing that we can do is offer choices. And if the person doesn't want any of those choices, to respect that as the choice as well, right? Where somebody just might need space and they might not want to interact with anyone, and that's okay.
Kaela, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say essentially the same thing, having as many choice points as possible and respecting what those choices are. Sometimes the best thing that we can do for somebody is give them space, and that can be really hard for us because we want to feel active in our helping, and sometimes the best action is really stepping away.
Yeah, I agree. Someone anonymous asked, as someone who really struggles with serious mental health issues, how do I ask for help? Janina?
There's a technique that I really like, which is it would require maybe, if possible, a preemptive conversation with folks. But it would mean having a particular emoji that is a code for "I need help," right? Please check on me. And so the emoji that I've been promoting with my friends and clients is just a tomato emoji. Um, there's no specific reason for it. That's just what's been used. Feel free to use any other fruit or vegetable or, or any other emoji that works for you. But I think that it's so difficult in a time that we're struggling to have the words, whether it's to call or to text, right? To say, "Hey, I need help. I don't even know what I need." But I think it's so much easier to send a symbol, like a bat signal almost, right? And so for many of my friends and clients, that's what we do now. So we send each other a tomato emoji. And so that might then signal folks to check in to say, "Hey, I'm here for you. Can I come over? Would you like me to call you?" Once again, to then offer options to that individual.
Love that. So great. My friends and I have also implemented something similar as well, like a code word for when yeah. And yeah, it works. It definitely does. Kaela.
Sometimes when it's difficult to ask for help, even just connecting with folks anyways, even if you're not directly asking for help. Sometimes you can get into a conversation that starts to lead there anyways. Sometimes the conversation itself will help you feel better, even if you're not directly talking about the things that you need help with. I love the code word, code emoji idea. I I'm a high masculine neurodivergent person, and I find just being direct is the thing that's most helpful for me. So I've gotten in the habit of just telling people, "This is what I need. Can you help me?" And part of that for me has been accepting that sometimes somebody doesn't have the bandwidth to help, and that doesn't mean anything about them being rejecting of me or being a bad friend. It's just sometimes they also don't have the bandwidth. And so I personally find being direct is the most helpful when I'm feeling less able to be direct. Just reaching out and trying to be with somebody can be helpful.
Love that. This is a good question. How do you deal with feeling emptiness after doing so much or too much for someone?
A great question. So, it makes sense that our emotional spoons are going to be depleted, if you will, right after doing a lot for another person. And we can think of it as a drained battery on our phone, right? When our phone has a low battery, we plug it in, we leave it alone, right? We let it recharge. And I think for us, we need to do the same thing. We need to recharge our spoons, and we need to recharge our inner battery, if you will. And so it might look differently to different people. For some of us, for me as also a neurodivergent person, it means um, low stimulation, right? After I've been overstimulated, after I've expanded, all my energy. And so it might mean brain going to a quiet and dark place. So low lighting, low noise, right? Nonverbal time, right? Putting my headphones on. For other people, it might be maybe playing a video game or rewatching an episode of our favorite TV show, maybe Supernatural, for example, right? Doing something maybe that we've done before that doesn't require a lot of energy. And for many people, it's doing something we've done before. So again, it's not new, right? But it gives us almost like a connection, like a coming home. And so figuring out, I think, what that is and engaging in that activity and not chiding ourselves for doing that, but actually reminding ourselves, no, this is important. This is what I need to do to charge up my energy now. I think those are great reminders too.
Kaela?
I think that not chiding ourselves piece is so important. I mean, when I heard this question, the first thing that came to mind was what we were talking about earlier with self-compassion, where, it's really easy for us to judge ourselves in those moments of feeling empty. Empty has this really negative connotation to it. And if we can think of it in that more neutral way that I was talking about earlier, of this is just a feeling that happens, like Janina said, when your battery is drained, we don't have to put any kind of judgment on it. It's just the battery's drained and we need to fuel up. So fuel up.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really important too, is because destigmatizing that, because it's every one of us will go through waves of that. It's just part of being human. Let's see. It can be really difficult to put your own feelings aside and be empathetic when someone is feeling and behaving irritably. What would your advice be to friends and family members in these situations?
Yeah, great question. And that's the thing. I think that when somebody else is suffering, we're affected by it too, right? I think most of us are highly empathic people to where the pain in a person that we care about or even a complete stranger will impact us too. And so especially if another person is acting irritably, we might feel hurt as well. And so I think in those moments, recognizing, do I need to step out for a couple of minutes, which is perfectly fine, or do I want to remain in that situation? And if I do, what support do I need? So for me, for example, if I'm engaging with somebody who is being, a little bit challenging in the moment, one of the techniques that helps me is putting my hand on my heart center and just having a light pressure on my heart, almost like a hug. And so this action of taking a light pressure on our heart actually releases this magical hormone called oxytocin. It's a self-soothing hormone, and it helps us feel a little bit better, for some of us anyway. And then there's another technique I like to utilize, which is I take a breath in for me and out for the other person, right? So as I'm breathing, as I'm listening to what the other person is saying, I'm also actively engaging in compassion for myself, compassion for the other person. I even silently might recite a breath in for me, a breath out for you. So it's almost like I'm charging my energy and sending you energy. So that allows me to stay in the moment, practice compassion for both of us in the moment. But if I'm really overwhelmed, I might say, you know what, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Give me a few minutes. And I might step out to the bathroom. I might do some breathing before coming back to that individual, and that's okay too.
Love that. Kaela?
I think this is one of those places where boundaries can be really helpful. Um, you know, when I think of somebody getting really irritable with me while I'm trying to help or trying to find empathy, a lot of what I'm doing is keeping my tone neutral and trying not to escalate the situation further, which, for me personally is very hard. I am somebody who's very, very quick to anger. That is something I have had to work on over the years. And so, you know, doing a lot of what Janina was talking about and kind of grounding and regulating our nervous system can be helpful to just stay in the moment. And then being able to set boundaries, whether that's getting up and walking away or just setting boundaries like, hey, I really want to help and I can't do that while you're yelling. Can we quiet a little bit? So making really direct asks and not asks that blame the person for anything or tell the person that they're wrong, just like, I'm trying to do something and I can't do that while you're doing what you're doing. Can we do something different here?
Ah, I love that. I think that's awesome. Someone said, same here, sister. That's funny. All right. Do you have any advice for someone like me who struggles with always being there for people in their struggles to the point that they forget to take a step back and take a bit of time for their own personal needs? Oof, we all been there, I promise. Janina.
First of all, I feel you. The empath in me sees the empath in you. I feel you and thank you for being the amazing human that you are. Um, so for me, one of the practices I use in case this is helpful for you is I try to, when I remember, which is not every day, I try to start my morning with an intention, right? In terms of I set an intention to take at least some breaths for me or at least some actions for me throughout the day. And so for me, just that intention is helpful because then I'm more likely to check in with myself during the day. Sometimes it might mean setting an alarm, let's say for noon or 3 p.m., just a check-in. Remember to check in on yourself or what do you need? And so sometimes just even those reminders are so helpful because again, we can't pour from an empty cup, right? We really do need to charge up our own battery as much as possible, not only to give to others, but also to, to not just survive, but also to thrive. And so I think really building it into our daily practice, I think can be really helpful and can also, again, give us the energy to empath with other people too.
Kaela?
I have somehow, and I wish I could say that I did this intentionally, but I have somehow cultivated a community of people around me who give me those reminders externally. So I have a lot of people in my life, including coworkers and students who will check in every now and then and be like, "Have you had a calorie today? Are you taking care of yourself?" And I've found that that's really helpful. I think that I cultivated that by modeling that with the folks that I work with, but I have found that to be really helpful to have the internal reminders and to also have some external reminders of, hey, it's okay to slow down.
I love that. And I love the mention of modeling too, because that's something that for those of you who are in Misha's panel, we talked about a lot in terms of modeling kindness for other people and modeling that behavior. And I think sometimes that really does help people help you when you are telling your friends, when you are helping your friends in the way, obviously, again, checking in and seeing how they, everyone is different. You tailor it to everyone. But my friends and I mean, we all love, for example, we love cooking for each other. It's one of our love languages and stuff like that. And so we know when we get together, that's what we're going to do. That's going to fill our cups. That's going to make us happy. And we've cultivated that environment together just by, like you said, doing. So, like, I think really, I mean, talk to your friends, talk to your communities. I think, even I think some people were saying that they were feeling like they were scared of the stigmatism around not being okay and stuff like that. And I think that part of breaking that stigma is having those conversations, as difficult as it may be for the individual. Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. Sometimes I have found a lot are uncomfortable with hard emotions, and as a result, their helping is more their discomfort and attempting to manage or control the person, which does more damage. How would you suggest people realize this in themselves so that they can truly support another who is struggling with mental health? I like that
Wow.
question a lot.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. So is the question asking, what do we do when other people are not comfortable with certain emotions that we might be going through? Is that right?
I think they're looking for suggestions on how people can realize when they're uncomfortable, when they're helping is just because they're trying to change or fix the person because their behavior is detrimental to the person trying to help, instead of
Mm,
approaching it with a we're trying to help you mentality. I think the person
right.
is saying, how would you suggest people realize that in themselves so that they can actually support via the correct mean or the more,
Yeah.
helpful means.
Yeah. Wow, what a great question. Um, my mind is going on, many different tracks. Kayla, would you want to take this first?
Yeah, I can take this one first.
Thank you.
This makes me think of a tendency that I've seen towards a lot of folks in the LGBTQ community right now, where we're having big emotions about world events at the moment, and there's a lot of what I call unintentional gaslighting, where folks will say like, "Oh, it's not going to be as bad as you think," or "It's not as bad as you think," and it is actually as bad as we think. This is terrifying. And what we need isn't to not feel sad or not feel angry or not feel despair. What we need is for folks to be able to sit with us in those moments and let those feelings exist and be. And it's one of the reasons that many queer folks find more comfort in queer communities is that we're all experiencing those same things and we don't try to talk each other out of those experiences. So part of that, I think, in terms of how to kind of help people realize that is being able to just say, "No, what I'm feeling is valid." I had a conversation with one of my friends about this where I was really upset about something that was happening in the world. I think it was a policy that was affecting one of my communities, and she said, "Have you thought about going to therapy?" And, I'm a therapist. I definitely have used therapy in my life before and do use it when I need it, but this was not one of those situations, and I kind of pushed back and said, "No, this isn't a I need to go to therapy moment. This is a actually something really terrible is happening in the world, and I need you to, like, be able to sit here and witness this with me." So being able to communicate that can be helpful, and sometimes it's about finding support in communities that can sit with that because not everybody's ready to.
Yeah, what a great response. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I 100% agree with Kayla. And I think so often it can be, s- kind of like a double whammy where we might be going through a hard time, and the person that is seemingly trying to help us might actually be, as Kayla mentioned, maybe perhaps unintentionally gaslighting us. And so then we have to manage our own experiences while trying to set boundaries with the other person, while coaching them on how to help us, right? Which can be so frustrating and so challenging. And so I loved Kayla's idea about maybe checking in with our community first and getting that support. And also perhaps letting that person know, hey, I appreciate what you're trying to do. And what would be more helpful to me is this, right? It would be more helpful to me instead of advice giving or trying to talk me out of how I feel, you let me share my experience with you and then maybe just validate me by saying something like, that sounds really hard. And I'm not above letting the person know exactly the phrase I need to hear, because I think a lot of times we do have certain key phrases that help that other people might not be aware of. And so sometimes by modeling, right, by showing the other person the phrase that we want, either in using it in conversations with them or directly requesting, can you please use this phrase with me, can actually be really helpful, and hopefully the person will then continue using it in the future.
I love that. This is also, you guys are coming up with some really great questions. I feel like social media, especially TikTok, have been pushing mental health discourse back instead of being helpful as you would expect for more people talking about it. What are your guys' opinions on that?
I think it depends on the specific platform, but also specific accounts, right? There are many wonderful accounts on all platforms that are really helpful. There are many mental health professionals out there who provide really helpful skills, just kind of quick go-to skills on some of these platforms, and also really helpful ways of thinking about things. Um, I think the trouble comes from when people who have no background, either their own experience, or don't have any educational background, who will then try to give advice that might not necessarily be best for other people. And so as a mental health professional, I always recommend discernment, right? If somebody either has some kind of training, or they are sharing their own experience, both of which are valid. They don't have to have credentials to share their own experience. Both of these are valid. But if someone just says, hey, you should do this if you're feeling sad, just think positively, for example, then I strongly advise that we really think about what experience does this person have, and do I really want to take this kind of advice? And so I think it's becoming harder and harder to have that discernment, I think, because we're so flooded with information, but this is when it's most necessary.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think the problem comes at the polls. So the problem comes when you have somebody who is, overgeneralizing. It's the extremes. And I think it's the extremes on both ends. So if you have someone who's speaking from personal experience, who's saying my personal experience is everyone's experience with this, that's one extreme that's bad. It's also a bad extreme when I've seen some mental health providers go on TikTok and sort of lambast everyone who's speaking from their personal experience. That also shuts down discourse. There's actual harm that the medical industry has done to many people, and there's valid stories being told through social media. And unfortunately, instead of acknowledging that, there are a lot of folks who have gone on social media as professionals to say, like, what are you doing? Get out of this lane. This isn't what you should be doing. And that also really pushes the discourse back in an unfortunate way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, Janina, what you're saying about discernment is super important. I think this is not something that is specific to just people in the mental health sector online. I think that this is something, this whole polarization is something we've seen across the board. And my advice to everyone here is just really, really check your sources. Really, really check your sources. And I mean, do the extra work to like properly search for where that information is coming from, because it is really easy to fall victim to misinformation these days on all levels. And I think we have to be very, very diligent about that. I mean, you blink and you miss 3 world events these days. So you have to really make sure you guys are checking those sources. I know I'm a victim of that too. I've sometimes have seen something and taken it for face value that I shouldn't have. So just diligence in the sources. It's my advice. How do you address someone whose actions have hurt you when you know the other person is also struggling? I always want to be considerate of their needs, but by putting it off saying anything indefinitely only makes me feel worse. That's a great question.
I love that question, and I so wish we had like 8 hours together just to to talk about this one question alone, right? And so here's the thing. The other person's experience of suffering is valid, but so is yours. And if somebody has hurt you in some kind of way or has done something to upset you, I think that it is perfectly okay to bring it up. I think that it might be helpful to think about maybe what would be a kind way, but also maybe an assertive way that I can bring it up. And there is a way to be assertive and kind at the same time, right? So an example might be, hey, I know you're going through a lot, and would it be okay if I bring something up to you? And if not, can we schedule a time and day, right? So, and then once that time comes up, then maybe letting a person know, I know you're going through a lot, and I just wanted to bring something up. There's something that impacted me in our conversation. And then I really like using, I statements, as you might remember from Supernatural, and letting the person know how maybe something that transpired has impacted me. And the most important thing is making a request, right? Such as, hey, in our last conversation, it hurt me when this thing occurred. Can I please make a request that in the future we both try to address it this way? And I find that a lot of times individuals are very open to that. If, however, they start getting defensive, if they start putting you down for your reaction, please know that is no longer that's not a you issue. It wasn't in the first place, but it is not a you issue. It is a them issue. And at that point, it is okay to say, this conversation is getting a little too much for me, so I'm going to take a break right now. So that the conflict doesn't keep escalating, and it's okay for you to take time to figure out what you want to do at that point.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add other than some resources for folks to take a look at that have a lot of this embedded in it. A lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about addressing others comes out of interpersonal effectiveness, which is a skill in dialectical behavior theory. And so, dialectic behavior therapy, or DBT, is something that there are a lot of self-help books on with various exercises. It's a type of therapy that you can seek out for a number of different things, but it's where a lot of the skills we're talking about come from, if folks want to look more into this.
Yeah. That. This is Also a good question. It's something that I have personal experiences with is how do I get over the shame of having bipolar disorder? And that is something that everyone who has a mental health diagnosis at some point usually feels like they are up against that stigma because it is real, it is there, it is present. There are people who do judge you. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for you. You are responsible for how you manage your thing. And for me, I just prioritized getting myself under control. And once I did that, I mean, you control who you tell. You control who you allow to be in on that with you. And just figuring out those coping skills and coping mechanisms was what really helped me not hide, but like avoid having to be so openly personal with every person that I met. And once that was done, things became so much easier. You know, like I said, you get to choose, you get to make that path for yourself. A kitty. But yeah, Janina, any thoughts on that?
I just want to, hold everyone that's ever experienced that in my heart. Because I think, unfortunately, so many of us worldwide still carry, whether it's mental illness or chronic any chronic illness, we still carry the stigma of having it. Um, and exactly as Maddie said, right, that it is up to us who we tell. Sometimes even a trusted person or a person we thought we could trust might not respond positively. And this is where, having a community, as Kaela mentioned, right, that of folks that are able to support us is so helpful. Having a therapist that we trust might be ideal, although that's not for everybody, and that's okay. Therapy is not end all and be all. If it helps you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay, right? But having some kind of a supportive community, ideally of other people that have gone through something similar, doesn't have to be the same diagnosis, can be very helpful. And then there's an exercise I really like doing with my clients, and it can be a written exercise or it can be an art project. It can look like anything. And basically, the idea is if you imagine that maybe 10 years from now, you get an award for being basically a mental health hero, if you will, a representative and an advocate for people with a similar condition, then what would you want this story to be about? If, let's say, there's a movie about you, what would you want this story to be about? What would you want people to know? What would you want people to walk away with? And I find that very often when we think of ourselves in this way, whether or not we take steps to do it, I think for some people, it might be a powerful reframe of, oh, I can be an advocate. Whether or not we actually start taking those steps publicly or not, because the truth is, we need advocates, we need people to speak out about what their experiences are. And you have 10 people in the same room, everybody might be diagnosed with the same disorder, and all their experiences are going to be different, right? And so if we're able to share our experiences, whether it's anonymously or by using our identity, I think it really changes the stigma over time. And if we allow ourselves to remember that we have a purpose, right, with this, then I'm hoping that that's something that can be helpful too.
I personally found it really helpful to experiment with pride in some of the things that I didn't always like about my mental health diagnoses. So, you know, not doing that in a way that discounts the struggle, because I think that there's a way that media sometimes portrays mental illness as a superpower in a way that is very demeaning and takes away the struggle. It's like, here's all the good things without any of the bad things. In trying to find balance, though, there are things that I love about my depression, for example. I love that it makes me a more compassionate person at times. I love that it is something that at times feeds an artistic side of myself that I can get really introspective about. There are things about my experiences with PTSD that I like that my body and my mind are trying to keep me safe. I also work on those things, and so it's finding that balance, that neutrality to just be able to find an acceptance that this is a part of who I am. It's not all of who I am. And it's a part of who I am that contributes in ways that sometimes are helpful and sometimes aren't so helpful. I think also finding community that finds pride in those things and that finds humor in those things. Um, some of the best interventions that I've had in my own mental health have been joking with friends about things that I'm experiencing. Um, you know, it's not something that has a one size fits all. And stigma is something that impacts so many of us on so many different levels. I encourage folks to look at where you can find resilience, not just in yourself, but in that community and coalition building as well. Um, it really, really does help to have others see that as a positive side of you and not just a thing that it needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. Also to Josie, because I know you were saying that you said, I just want people to ask questions rather than avoiding me. Honestly, like Kaela said, surround yourself with people who are asked questions. Like I definitely did cut people out of my life who weren't able to be there for me and be kind to me in the way that I needed them to be. And it wasn't a I hate you and I'm never going to speak to you again type thing. It was a this person doesn't understand, so I'm not going to give any more than I already have to this relationship. And it, naturally fizzled out and it was fine. And now I have a group of friends who do ask those questions and who do ask what you need. I know that that feels scary, like to hear, but it is, you will find your community. You will find your people. I know that a lot of people don't feel like they will, but they're coming. They're there. I promise. Um, Gia is asking, I experience a lot of anxiety in school, and sometimes I don't know how to manage it and take a step back. How do I manage it? And they specifically said that the school counselor, they don't really click with her.
Yeah. Again, I wish we had, like at least 8 hours together, just to talk about this one thing. And I wish there were so many questions that I could also ask you directly, to learn more about you, to see what techniques might be most helpful to you. But I would recommend maybe experimenting with some things, right? So for example, as a neurodivergent person, I know that for me, some things that help me to manage my anxiety are to reduce the overstimulation I'm going through. So for me, it's helpful to either put on my headphones if the place allows it. If not, there are these tiny little earplugs called Loop that was specifically developed for neurodivergent people. And so they help to reduce noise, and sometimes wearing sunglasses can be helpful in terms of reducing overstimulation. For me, sometimes going to a quieter place like a bathroom and doing some breathing exercises, again, with a hand on my heart, can be really helpful. Um, and again, I wish I had some one-on-one time with you to learn more about you, to learn what are some techniques that are helpful, whether it's music or whether it's watching clips of your favorite show, or maybe talking to a trusted person in school. But I'm wondering if some of those things might be helpful at least some of the time.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna tackle the taking a step back part. I think one of the things that can be helpful in taking a step back is to gamify the situation. So one of the things that I'll do sometimes when I'm feeling anxious, and I recommend this to clients as well, is to think about if you remember those like little Tamagotchi pets in the 2000s, um, those or any kind of thing that you have to take care of in a game. So, if I can just think through like what are the tasks and how do I think of this as something that I can have like a little system of rewards with, it takes some of the stakes out of it if I gamify it. So it's not a personal failing. It's, oh, well, if I didn't get this done, then I just have to go back and redo it because we're playing a game. So anytime I can gamify something or anytime my clients can gamify something, it just takes us one step removed from the thing. And sometimes just being one step removed from the thing, however you can do that imaginally, can be really helpful.
I love that. I love Tamagotchi. I'm gonna bring those back. This last question is I'm gonna read it verbatim and then kind of try to generalize it a little bit. how do you deal with when the therapist that you connected with says that you'll have to find a new therapist because that therapist's pay went up? It has been quite overwhelming. What if the next therapist I find says the same thing again? And this is why they end up not believing in therapy. And I think that that is unfortunately an experience that a lot of people have had within the US healthcare and other healthcare systems. And I want to make it a little bit more broad just so that I can apply to other people as well. But just like do you have any advice for finding new therapists and navigating the costs of those?
Wow, that's just kind of heartbreaking, not kind of, sorry. I sometimes use this word that isn't appropriate actually. It is heartbreaking, and especially if you have found a bond with a therapist. Um, it is true that therapists might raise their fees across the board, right, for all their clients. And some therapists might not mind if you ask for what's called a sliding scale. A sliding scale is a reduction in fees based on, circumstances. And so, although a therapist might say, starting next year, all my fees are going up by X amount, they might be doing that as a policy for all their clients. And if you ask, hey, would you consider offering me a sliding scale? This is what I can afford. Some therapists might be willing to work with you, and especially if you already have one that you connect with, I'm hoping that that might be something they might be willing to do. Um, if they're not, then I think my favorite way to look for a therapist is through psychologytoday.com. That's just a site that I really like. The reason why I like it is because you can filter the search by your insurance, for example, the particular condition that you would like to treat, the gender or even sexual orientation of the therapist. Like, so for example, if you're in the LGBT community, you can see therapists that are in the LGBT community as well. And so that's really helpful. And so once you filter the search results, then you can read the different profiles of the therapists. And then what I often recommend is looking on those profiles to see if therapists offer a 15-minute free consultation. And what that does is that it means that the therapist would be willing to get on the phone with you or sometimes video for about 10 to 15 minutes. They wouldn't charge you for it, but you can ask all the questions you want, such as, for example, do you have experience working with somebody with my background? And what are your price policies? And, do you offer sliding scale and things like that? And I think that if somebody's not willing to offer you a free consult before accepting you as a client, maybe consider looking for somebody else, right? Because you deserve that. You deserve to be able to get a feel for that individual to see if you're a good fit before you start paying for sessions. And also you deserve to work with somebody that would be willing to offer you a sliding scale if you're struggling financially.
Another thing that can be helpful is looking for institutions instead of individuals. Institutions often have different policies that don't charge at all or charge on a consistent sliding scale, and they're not going to have those same kind of price hikes. So often these are training clinics or city-run clinics or public health clinics, and a lot of them since the pandemic, even though they're located in urban centers most of the time, a lot of them have moved towards telehealth models. And so a lot of them offer video conferencing instead of having to go into the office. And so I really recommend those. I've actually never worked in private practice as a psychotherapist. I've only ever worked for institutions. And um, I know a lot of folks are really reluctant to see trainees, and a lot of times things are being offered by trainees, but I think it's really important to remember that the attendings behind the trainees are consistent. They are licensed practitioners. They're often folks who really do this work because they love this work. Um, and it's really a fantastic way to get consistent, stable mental health care that doesn't have those fee changes attached to it.
Good answer. All right, well, we are at time. We got to get our little transitional period in before the last panel of the day, which is really exciting. So thank you all for being here. Please join us for the last one. Thank you so much to Janina and Kaela for joining us for this panel. I really love getting to chat with both of you guys, and hopefully we'll get to do more in the future. And thank you so much for joining. Great. Bye, everyone. See you at the next one.